When you think of the United States and Iran today, you probably think of them as total rivals, right? Well, believe it or not, it wasn't always this way. So today, let's get into the really complex history of how these two countries went from being partners to, well, sworn enemies.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How did a relationship that seemed like a solid friendship just completely fall apart and turn into decades of hostility? To really get it, we've got to go back in time.
I know it's hard to imagine, but before the late 1970s, the U.S. and Iran were actually close. The U.S. was a huge supporter of Iran's efforts to modernize under its ruler, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
And look, this wasn't just some informal handshake deal. This quote comes from an official treaty of amity signed back in 1955. It was a formal, on-paper declaration of friendship. But, as you can probably guess, there were some serious tensions bubbling just under the surface. The first really big crack in the relationship showed up in 1953. And this is absolutely critical. You can't understand the deep mistrust that poisons the relationship even today without knowing what happened here.
Okay, so here's the deal. Iran's democratically elected prime minister, a guy named Mohammad Mossadegh, decided to nationalize the country's huge oil industry. Basically, he wanted Iran to control its own oil, not foreign companies. But you have to remember, this was the height of the Cold War. The U.S. was worried that an independent Iran might cozy up to the Soviet Union, so the CIA stepped in and helped organize a coup. They kicked Mossadegh out and brought the U.S.-friendly Shah back to power. For so many Iranians, it didn't matter what the reason was. This was a complete betrayal, a foreign government messing directly with their politics.
Now, let's jump forward, because all that resentment from the '53 coup just simmered for years and years until it finally exploded in the Iranian Revolution of 1979. This was the moment that shattered everything for good.
The revolution didn't just swap out the government. It totally changed Iran's whole identity. The U.S.-backed monarchy was gone. In its place was an Islamic republic, fiercely independent and led by Ayatollah Khomeini. And here's the wild part. The new government didn't see the U.S. as a partner anymore. No, they saw it as the great Satan, an imperialist enemy. Talk about a complete 180.
And this new anti-American feeling wasn't just talk. It blew up into a massive, direct confrontation when a group of Iranian students, totally swept up in the revolution, stormed the U.S. embassy in Tehran. This one act would change everything. For 444 agonizing days, 52 Americans were held captive. The whole world watched this crisis unfold on TV, and it just completely obliterated any tiny bit of trust that might have been left. The hostility wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud, it was public, and for both sides, it was deeply, deeply personal. So after the hostage crisis, the two countries entered this weird new phase. It wasn't an all-out war, but it was a long, simmering Cold War fought indirectly through what we call proxy conflicts.
And you can really see how this played out. Iran started backing groups like Hezbollah, which were fighting U.S. allies in the Middle East. At the same time, the U.S. was supporting Saddam Hussein's Iraq during its horrible 8-year war against Iran. Then, fast forward to 2002, and the U.S. government famously calls Iran part of an axis of evil. It was basically a war fought in the shadows, with both sides trying to undermine the other without ever fighting directly.
Okay, let's bring this story into our own time, the 21st century. The core conflict is still there, but the fights are a little different now. It's mainly centered on Iran's nuclear program and a few really tense direct confrontations.
For a little while there, it actually seemed like things might calm down. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal was this huge diplomatic achievement. The idea was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and in return, the world would lift economic sanctions. But then, in 2018, the U.S. pulled out of the deal and slapped all those sanctions right back on, which sent tensions through the roof all over again. And those tensions pretty much hit a boiling point in 2020 when the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani. Now, you have to understand, he wasn't just some general. He was the mastermind behind Iran's entire military strategy in the Middle East. He was a huge, powerful figure. Killing him brought the two countries closer to a real, direct war than they had been in decades, and it just goes to show how incredibly fragile the whole situation still is.
So, when you ask how all this happened, well, there's no easy answer. It's this toxic cocktail of things: a foreign-backed coup, a radical revolution that totally redefined a country, a hostage crisis that created a wound that never healed, and more than 40 years of deep, corrosive mistrust.
This long, tangled history is still shaping events all over the Middle East and the entire world,
even as we speak. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all. After all this time, is there any way to pull back from the brink? Or is this cycle of conflict just going to keep going?